Righto, so dead window, this driver's side, other windows work. So what do you do if you have a Subaru that other windows are going down normally? Other side, but this window does not go down. So I found another video that talks that describes really well how to pull the trim off and get the motor out, and I'm going to show you what to do to repair the motor that you've already got so you don't have to buy a new one, because I couldn't find a single video on that. This is an 07 SJ Forester. Righto, so you've successfully got the motor out of your 2007, which is 2004 to 2008 SG Forester. I'm just going to show you how I've pulled this apart and how I'm going to grease it and re-lubricate it. You can also see that the cogwheel there is pretty rusted. I did clean it up with a wire brush. Rather than replacing the whole motor mechanism, I'm going to see if I can repair this motor. Now you will notice there is a little lubricating cap here. If you wiggle that off, like so, there is a point to inject some sort of oil or lubricant into the mechanism here. You'll also see that there are little compression points there to fix this outer cowling onto the plastic or ABS motor mechanism. So I'm going to gently lever these off so I can expose the internal workings, because really there's only a couple of things that can go wrong. Obviously this is a worm drive here, you've got an electric motor, you've got a worm drive, and then you've got a gear set in there. So it can only be either the motor, which is seized, or which is probably unlikely, or this, and you can see because of all the rust markings on the window mechanism that it's likely that this is just dried out and started to seize up and got harder and harder to work. So all I'm going to do is get a fairly heavy flat bladed screwdriver, square end, and pop that in the end there, put a bit of pressure on it and flatten that out. 1 point, 2 points and 3 points, and I'm going to mark it with a texter just so that I know where I bent that out. You can see the texter marks there and there and there, so that's where I bent the tabs out. I'm just going to lever that off. Yeah, it looks like it's coming off pretty easily. Okay, so that's what they look like inside. So got a Circlip, central bearing, and so I've got to take that Circlip off and pull all this apart and re-lubricate it. If you don't have Circlip pliers, and clearly I don't, you can get a flat blade screwdriver underneath one side and then gently lever up the other side, or just work your way around. But they will pop off, so you just have to be a little bit careful. Otherwise you're going to lose this little fella and you'll probably never find it. I'll work out how to pull this mechanism apart and see what's in. Just work your way around the outside with a couple of flat blade screwdrivers just to lever it up, one on each side. And basically all the lube in here is extremely dry, so that should be easy. Bit of silicone lube in there and should be right as rain. Now I am going to try and pull all of this mechanism out. Remember, take photos as you go so you know exactly how this thing went together. And what I'm also interested in is to see, there we go, there's the worm drive. So as I suspected, there's the worm there. And I am going to re-lube this whole thing. This is very, very, very dry. And it shouldn't matter how this goes back together, primarily because it's the electronics that do the current sensing with CAN bus on modern systems, rather than having any kind of mechanical lock on a position. So what I'm saying is this doesn't matter where it goes back in the window, as long as you can reset it in, the electronics should pick that up. Because this will continue to spin indefinitely. It's just a motor, it's just a worm drive. Nothing special to it. And I actually suspect a major part of the problem is probably nothing to do with the motor itself, but it's actually to do with this shaft, which is dried out. So I'm finding it very difficult. I can't turn that by hand, So this motor, it's a fairly decent 12-volt motor, but this has seized up. So if I can get some lubricant in between the outside of this plastic ABS and the inside of here, then maybe the problem will be fixed easily. So it's got trusty WD, and I'm just going to run some around the outside just to try and let that soak. And I'll put some vice grips on the outside just to work that in. Yeah, that is stiff as anything. No wonder that poor little motor can't turn it. Oh wow, yeah, that is really stiff. And you can work it out. Ah yeah, see, I can pull that out. So I'll give that a really good clean actually, and then re-lube it and put it back together. So this is a close-up of the spline and the gear teeth. It's covered in a bit of WD-40, but it's not in very good condition. So that's the groove for the Circlip there, and I'll just give this a really good clean. There is an O-ring there that I can feel, and I'll put some silicone lube on this, and then that'll fix it up. So you can pull that O-ring off, don't lose it, and give that face a bit of a clean. And I'm going to clean up these teeth. I'll get a flat blade screwdriver in here just to clean these teeth out, and you can see that there's obviously a lot of water ingress, a lot of water damage here in the past. Clean these with a wire brush and away we go. So what I'm doing, I'm just working around and getting this flat blade, this little ring retaining plate away. Right, the other thing I recommend doing is just getting a little flat blade file and just running it around the outside just to get rid of any accumulation of rust or build up of junk, just to make this be able to run smoothly. So this is the mechanism. I'm just using a dirty cloth just to really try and clean inside before I re-lube it. We can reassemble this. Gosh, that's a nice sloppy fit now. Put this back in. Now obviously we need the O-ring. Oh, look, 1000%. I bought this ages ago. Bit of high temperature silicone grease. Absolutely outstanding purchase for me. Really handy for all of these kind of jobs. Put that back in. Make sure that the O-ring side is really well greased up, and that works like a charm. And I am going to put some on the back of all of these components here, because these were all pretty dry and crusty as well. Just going around the outside of the ring gear for the worm drive, putting a little bit of silicone on there. Righto, while I'm here I thought I'd pull this whole thing apart. Got some brushes in there. So the stator is at the front, and I will re-grease up the back bearings there and make sure we've got some good contacts, make sure the springs are okay for the brushes here, and clean that up and put that back together. And this also was extremely dry, so all these components could really do with some lubricant. So I'm looking at one of the brushes here, and this one in particular is quite carboned up. This one is pretty good, but this one looks like it's been getting only partial contact, so I'm going to unscrew it, bend it out a little bit, and then seat it back in with a screwdriver. Just adjusted this to 12 volts. Righto, that's all powered up, all reassembled I should say. Okay, all power on. Beautiful. Other way. Problem solved. It goes in, face down. Great. Okay, Circlip's back on. I'm going to put some power on, and I'll show you the current draw. There you go, about 1.8 amps is the no load current at 12 volts. Alright, last step. Just put the weather seal cap on. I'm going to use a pair of pliers just to crimp those back over. One last power up. And in reverse. Very happy with that. Righto, 07 Forester. So we've got our repaired motor here. The orientation is like that. So it has to slide up, the motor faces downwards, and basically that's the way that you do it. And I'll show you how I've done it. That's the view inside the window mechanism there. So I've got to pull this mechanism forward, slide the cog up in behind there, and then put the 3 bolts back in. I'm not going to go through getting the motor out, because another guy, and I'll link to him, has very clearly articulated how to get the motor out. So I'm going to put the motor in. I've taken off one of the screws here to make it easier to move that forward to get the motor in and wiggle it up into place, and then I'll test it. Now that clunk there, what I just did is I pulled out that last screw to move this mechanism forward in here, but when you do that, the whole mechanism wants to slide, so be really careful, because if you do that and something happens to the glass, you can see mine's frozen, the window motor failed about 2/3 of the way down. You're gonna really, or you could really struggle getting the whole mechanism back in. And it may in fact be easier to see that little hole there. That's where this cog line has to line up with, so it's just as easy to pull this forward enough and then line that up with the cog. That's what I'm going to try and do. Righto, so that is in place. I don't know if you can see, I'm kind of filming blind here, but basically I feel like the cog is engaged on the window mechanism ring gear, and I'm going to get the 3 bolts back in. You can see I'm using the GoPro app here to find out where the screws go in the back of the motor. Now I'm not going to do those up tight until I know all 3 are in. Now if you can see that those screws are not properly realigned, well, they're not properly realigned, so if you're like me and you actually took those out to get the motor mechanism back in, what you should do is to take the load off just by lifting up the bottom of the glass, and as you lift up the bottom of the glass, move these pesky cables out of the way, you'll see that you get a bit better access to some realignment, to allow some realignment for these bolt holes. So that was the risk with pulling them out. There we go, that one goes in. There we go, lift the whole thing up with your fingers. And you're done. And do those up tight. Everything goes back the way that it came on. Don't forget to put your plate back on. And that's pretty much that. So this goes on next. Gee, I wish my neighbour would walk his dog, stop it crying all day. Anyway, joys of people with dogs. Now I got rid of the old dual cone speakers and ended up putting in a remote tweeter up the top here, as well as some Pioneer 3-ways that I had lying around. So the 2D faces up. You got 3 locating holes, pretty straightforward, and just screw that together. Now when you're putting this all back together, it's going to be easier to clip the window in with the glass down out of the way, so that's what I'm going to do.